Good morning. Hey, just want to say that your group paragraphs really came off very well. A lot of you had some really good examples of having those group sessions, those group meetings within your family. And there's so many times that that's going to happen. You know, a lot of times when people think of group meetings, they think about, meeting in the conference room at work or, doing lab work if you're taking a science course at Bergen. But you know what? In the family, you happen to do that a lot. And quite a few of you came up with some really good examples. Of course, a lot of you had the same example that I provided last time, where if you have that death of a grandparent and the other grandparent can't really live on their own anymore, and a lot of you have to get together, your aunts, your uncles, your mom, your dad, sometimes even you get involved about, what are we going to do with grandma, how are we going to handle this, that kind of thing. Who's going to go take care of her, who's going to shop for her, all these kind of things. You need to have group sessions. And as some of you did say, you know what, it takes more than just one meeting. This is a big reason why when I talk about the word time, when it comes to effective group communication, sometimes time is necessary. Not just in an initial meeting where you don't think you're going to meet for just 15 minutes, but also there might be several meetings that have to take place before a resolution to your problem comes up. Also, another example that came up several times, which I thought was very interesting, was you sitting down as a family to talk about whether younger siblings who are in like grade school or high school, whether they should go back to school or stay virtual. And this is a big reason why our class is asynchronous. Even though when you first signed up for the class, it could have been like Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m., I wasn't going to do that. Because I know a lot of you, for example, let's say you're one of 4 kids. You and an older sibling are in college. You have one younger sibling in high school, one who's in 7th grade. At this time, if you were in my Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 class, we're all counting on that each and every one of your siblings, all 4 of you, all have your own computer. That's not always the case. It really isn't. And especially, one of these things, and we talk about this in the mass media class, I cannot wait to see what they write after this COVID emergency is over about the strength of Wi-Fi and streaming, because everybody's on it right now. I'm right now doing this at about 8:45 in the morning. If you go on right now, everybody's on. My wife is a principal in the city of Passaic, and her elementary school. She's watching classes all morning as they're being taught. And of course, it's all virtual. She's watching through a computer. So, it would be so difficult for, and a lot of you said, we've decided to let them go back. So at least some of the time, and I know some elementary schools, you only go back 2 or 3 days a week, the A day and the B day. As it's turned out to be. And it's because, you just don't have enough hardware at the house. No matter how many times your school system may say, hey, we have Chromebooks to give out if you need it, sometimes you just don't have enough. So these group meetings in the family, I thought there were some excellent examples that you guys provided. All right, but let's go ahead and move on. Now, also, just one note. Yes, there are some late speeches I have not gotten to yet. I will get to them soon. All right, so now, talking about today. In the previous session, I talked about groups and working in groups, the type of groups, that kind of thing. But I want to talk about now you as the individual group participant and ensuring that you are the most effective group participant you can be. Now, one of the ways to do that is to put together what I call my 4 individual preps. Okay? These are preparations that you can make to ensure that before you get into that group session, you are the most effective group participant you can be. Now, number 1, whatever you're going to be discussing in that group, make sure you're knowledgeable. Gain knowledge of whatever it is you're going to be talking about before you get into that group meeting. But despite all the knowledge that you do gain, always go in open-minded. Always know that someone else just might have a better idea than yours. Now, this is not easy. Because a lot of people will go into a meeting thinking, I know this way, and my way is the only way, it's the only way that's going to work, where it doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always work that way. You got to go in open-minded. Okay? Prejudice. Keep it out. Now, I'm not talking about the type of prejudice that you might think I'm talking about. I'm talking about, for example, and trust me, being out in the private sector and being as old as I am, I've come across this many times with other people. You may have somebody who 5 years ago did something and went behind your back and told your boss something about you, and you got angry about it, and you haven't talked to this person for 5 years. You've worked in the same place, but you've always despised this person. You're able to do your job without actually having to communicate directly with them. Well, now it's 5 years later, and you're in a group session, and you need to come up with a new idea for your company. And suddenly this person comes up with an idea, and you just say, I don't think that's good. That's not a good idea. And of course, you're not saying it because you thought about their idea and feel that it's not workable. You said it because 5 years, I still remember what you did to me. Well, believe it or not, that person who you have a prejudice against just might have the best idea. So whenever you go into a group meeting, keep your prejudice out. This also applied, there was a couple of your group meeting papers that I read where you were talking with some family members, and you know what? You got a little prejudice because that family member did this to you several years ago, or they did that. And sometimes it's difficult to do, but you got to keep that prejudice out. And then finally, there's nothing wrong with practicing politeness. Everybody thinks that if someone disagrees with you, you got to get nasty with them, or I have to go in and get it my way, and if not, then I don't care what anybody else says. What is that old saying Grandma used to have? You get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. So there's nothing wrong with practicing politeness in a speech. Now, what also helps is to ensure that before you go in there, that basically who you are and the kind of person you are, you will help to produce positive results in your group. And that means naturally assuming certain roles or behaviors. And everyone naturally assumes roles when they go into a group. I mean, you may go into a group and not say a gosh darn word. You're naturally assuming a role, albeit it's a negative one, but it's still naturally assuming a role. Now, if you start off on page 253, they have a great list of the different type of roles that you can naturally assume. And again, when I say naturally assume, it's not like somebody appoints you as this person. You're going to be the opinion giver. You're going to be the information seeker. You're going to be the coordinator. No. It's just something you naturally assume. It's just part of who you are. And it helps to make you an effective group communicator. You know, for example, as I look at page 253, got to put these on. Someone like an initiator and contributor. And again, their typical behavior is contributes ideas and suggestions, proposes solutions and decisions. This is someone who's actively involved in the group. You have someone who's an opinion giver, who states their beliefs or opinions having to do with suggestions made and indicates what the group's attitude should be. And there's nothing wrong with giving. I think everyone naturally assumes the role of an opinion giver. And there's so many different ones there. As a matter of fact, these are all what we call group task roles. There's 13 of them on page 253. These are roles that you naturally assume to help to complete the task at hand. Now on page 254, we have what we call social maintenance roles. This helps to build a positive cohesiveness among the group. Roles like naturally assuming the role of a supporter or an encourager, okay, can never hurt in a group. Praising your group mates for their ideas, encouraging them to keep coming up with those type of ideas. Someone who's a harmonizer, someone who's a tension reliever. I mean, these are all different groups, roles that you can assume to help keep a positive cohesiveness with your group. Now, there are 13 task roles and 7 social maintenance roles. And I have to tell you, you'd be surprised how many of these you do naturally assume. As a matter of fact, when I look at these every time, even this morning, I go back to my most recent group session, okay, which was, we haven't really had a department meeting online yet, virtual. So I go back to my last Veterans Committee meeting, which was in March, right before spring break. The spring break that still is continuing today. And we had a Veterans Committee meeting on campus, and I think there were 6 of us in the meeting. And we met for 55 minutes, and I could easily say, people, among those 20 roles, the 13 task roles, the 7 social maintenance, I know when I look at the typical behavior, I assumed at least 8 of those roles, at least. So you'd be surprised if you have effective group in you, how many of these roles you just naturally, so it just comes right out. Okay? Like I said, it's not like somebody tells you you're the opinion giver or someone tells you you're the harmonizer. It's just something that is naturally assumed. Now, of course, after all the positive, there is also the negative. And these are what we call dysfunctional roles. Now, with dysfunctional roles, they're not easily ignored because especially in the workplace, these are people you have to work through, okay? And like you can ignore a family member and still get along with the rest of the family. But a lot of times when it's someone you work with, you just can't like get up and leave that job, okay? For example, someone who's a blocker, someone who interferes with the progress of your group by rejecting ideas or taking a negative stand on any and all issues and refuses to cooperate. All right. It's a really nasty role that someone may naturally assume. You really don't want to have a blocker in your group, but if you do, what you have to do is you have to work through them. You have to exhaust, you go back to number 4 of my preps, which is politeness. You exhaust all avenues of kindness. Okay? You have to do that before you kind of move on without them. But you have to try and work through them. Again, if you're in a workplace, and let's say, I'll give you a great example. Let's say you get your bachelor's, you finish Bergen, go on and get your bachelor's degree. You get your entry-level position. After a year, you've just made the most money you've ever made in your life. You now have your own apartment. You have your own car. You're paying your car insurance. You got new furniture. You went to Raymore and Flanagan and got some inexpensive but good furniture. Hey, you're on your own. This is great. But then all of a sudden you have a group session at your job where someone comes off as a blocker or someone comes off as, say, for example, an aggressor. Someone who struggles for status by deflating the status of others and boasts and criticizes. You just can't get up from that job and quit. You can't. Then all of a sudden you've got collectors coming to take your furniture away and take your car away. All right. So what you have to do is practice or put into practice and exhausting all avenues of kindness. Okay. And those are just some of the 7 dysfunctional roles. You got to be careful. It happens rarely. Luckily, especially with the face-to-face classes, there are enough people who, when they show up to class, really want to get a good grade in the class, so they don't go dysfunctional. But I've had some blockers in the past. I'll give you a great example. Now, I say time. You want to take a significant amount of time to make sure you work. But for example, if we were a face-to-face class that met like Wednesday and Friday. Now, for those of you who may remember, it's been so long, but if you remember, a typical Wednesday-Friday class period is only an hour and 15 minutes. So I would give that group, whoever was in that class, let's say it's a Friday, and we're meeting in groups. I would give you an hour and 15 minutes. And usually, students would take an hour, and they could get the group work done. I had a group that was in an evening class. Now, evening classes are 2 hours and 45 minutes. If some of them only stay for an hour, hour and a half, that's fine. That's plenty of time for the group meeting that we have in class. One group stayed 3.5 hours. And it was because one of them was a blocker who just refused to cooperate with the rest of their group, got nasty with the other members of the group. It was 5 people in the group. So you had one, you had the 4 others. And they were just, every once in a while, one would get up and walk away, and then this one would get up and walk away from the table. They were so disgusted with this person who was the blocker. And the only reason why it actually ended after 3.5 hours was the blocker finally said, "Oh, just put my name down." It was this very tall young lady who, up to this point in the class, in the semester, had been a model student. So I was a little surprised when I read this, but they said she just got nasty. She was very dismissive of everybody else's ideas. It was just a mess. All right. That was about 15 or 16 years ago. Luckily, I really haven't had a blocker like that since, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. All right. So that now leads into your assignment. You have your assignment sheet attached. Go ahead and follow it. Write your group papers, and of course, they are due by 8 p.m. on Sunday evening. All right, you guys, have a good weekend. Work on those papers, and we'll see you again. Well, let me get over there. On Monday morning.